Alrighty, we're on to the fifth and final lecture video of this week. It's going to be a pretty short one. We only have 6 slides, including this title slide. And we actually have quite a few readings later in the semester on aggression and violence, sort of mob, gang mentality, and fan culture. But I wanted to give a little bit of a primer here in terms of aggression and catharsis as we talked about uses and gratifications and what fans are getting out of their behaviors, sometimes aggressive behaviors. So I wanted to devote a little bit of time to that in this opening week. And so just as it was important to define what a fan is, when we're talking about aggression and violence, we really need to lay out some definitions first. So an aggressive act is any act that hurts another physically, emotionally, or socially. And the key behind all of this is the intent of the act. So the act is very purposeful in trying to aggress against someone else. So it isn't just an accident happened and somebody got hurt. It was the intent was to harm someone. In terms of aggression, it is a successful act if that harm actually did. And most people think about, when they think about aggression, they think about physical acts, pushing, hitting, otherwise fighting. But certainly there are examples out there of psychological, emotional, social aggression that are prevalent in sports fan culture. So shouting down someone, booing, hissing. In terms of social aggression, we might think of this as middle school type of behavior where you're talking behind someone's back, saying, oh, this athlete doesn't fit in here, they aren't really one of us, we don't cheer for them. It might be the same thing for fans. So around a tailgate on a Saturday morning, we might be talking about other fans that they're not real fans, they shouldn't even be here, they shouldn't park here. So the type of aggression isn't a face-to-face aggression even, it's more of a relational aggression that we're trying to get other fans against this individual. So there's a lot of different ways that you can aggress against someone. Physical is obviously the sort of most easily identified, and then psychological, emotional, verbal assaults, shouting someone down. But then there are also more subtle ways like social or relational aggression. But regardless of the type, the key component is the intent to cause harm to another individual. And it obviously varies the type of harm that you're causing, but the intent behind it is really the key defining element for all of these acts. So now we're going to look a little bit at sort of what leads us down this road to aggression. And the literature really defines it or sets out 2 primary types of aggression, or causes of aggression rather. First is frustration and anger. So this can come from really anything in life. You could be having a bad day. It could be hot out. You don't like how much you had to pay for the tickets. You might be running late. Your kids might have caused a problem. The babysitter might have caused a problem. Any number of things. You couldn't find a parking spot. All of these sort of frustration things that kind of build up, and then you snap and lose your temper, and then you act aggressively against another individual. It might be things within the sporting event itself, so you're angry at the ump for making a bad call, so you decide to aggress against the umpire, shouting obscenities. Your team might not be playing well, and again, we've talked about how that relates directly to, if you're really sort of intensely following the team, it relates directly to your own self-esteem, your own feelings of worth, about or capabilities. So if your team's not playing well, you feel like you're not getting the right calls, all of this sort of frustration and anger kind of builds up and you eventually lose your temper. So a lot of maybe environmental factors, things around you, the fans around you might be all sort of piling on this frustration that builds up. The second type cause of aggression is instrumental, where we're using aggression to achieve a goal. So here we might be aggressive and budge in front of someone in the concessions line to get our food faster. We might drive aggressively through the parking lot to find the last parking spot and steal it from somebody else. Again, used to achieve a goal. In terms of identity or community, there are certain norms of aggression that we'll get into later in the semester, but sort of the social rules that make it okay to be aggressive against another individual or against another fan base or against the umpire. And that's really something I'd like us to spend a moment or two discussing currently. So your fifth and final discussion item, so once you're done with this discussion item, you can go ahead and submit your discussion post for the week. Talk about the norms or expectations of aggression within sports fan culture. When is it okay in the minds of some fans to aggress against another fan or spectator? When is it okay in the minds of some to aggress against athletes on the field of play? Talk about each of those two items. Sort of the first one is more of a general, and the second one is more of a specific type of discussion item. Touch on both of those, and then you're able to submit your discussion post, and then come on back over to the video. Alrighty, with your final discussion items completed, you should have submitted your discussion post to the forum. And let's move on to talk about releasing those frustrations through aggression and sort of the potential benefit for what's called catharsis. So sort of venting, releasing this pent-up aggression, releasing the hostility sort of within you, and using sports as a mechanism for catharsis. And there are actually cases in scholarship that show this sort of venting or performing physical acts can have kind of a cathartic effect. So hitting a boxer's punching bag or yelling into a pillow, things like that, have been shown to kind of release frustration. However, in terms of the success or lack of success of catharsis or a cathartic type of behavior, it must be directed or have sort of in mind the source of the frustration. So it doesn't always work really well for sports. So misdirected aggression against a spectator won't make you feel any better about the stack of bills waiting at home. It might feel good in the moment, I suppose, to yell or scream, just like screaming into a pillow, but it's certainly not going to solve any of the problems of bills waiting at home. Additionally, there's very little cathartic type of effect when you add alcohol to the scenario, or especially overconsumption of alcohol to the scenario. It's likely to reduce or remove any cathartic effect, and you're most likely just sort of self-medicating through alcohol if that's what you're trying to achieve, is some sort of cathartic effect, but you're also adding in alcohol. It probably isn't going to have any sort of actual release of frustration. In some cases, it might even exacerbate the need for more aggression, or sort of the inhibitions that you might have about performing an aggressive act might be reduced because of alcohol. Also, in terms of catharsis, because the outcomes of sports are so unpredictable, and you can't necessarily count on your team winning, to think of sports as a way to release stress or release frustration is problematic because your team will lose a lot of the time. Again, we go back to sort of the self-esteem boost and why we don't just pick winners. Whatever the reason, we don't just pick winners to follow each season. We typically stick with the team that's our favorite team, and they don't always win. So the idea of that it could be some sort of escape or release of aggression or frustration. In many cases, the team itself is causing frustration. So if you are cheering for a really bad baseball team, you have 162 days where most of those days aren't going to be really good days in terms of the cathartic potential of watching the team play. So though some research indicates that catharsis can occur in certain situations, there can be sort of aggressive acts that release pent-up frustration. It is unlikely that sports is a reliable source of this catharsis. Outcomes are uncertain. Your team might lose. Your players might not play well. The refs might blow a call. Alcohol consumption throws off everything, and especially at the professional level, sports and alcohol often go hand in hand in terms of social norms. And then common causes of frustration in life have little to do with the aggression that you see or perform in and around sporting events. So those frustrations are still going to be present, obviously, after you leave the arena. So if anything, maybe spending too much money on tickets is causing more stress. So you have a few hours of kind of distraction, but certainly those problems aren't going away. It'd be better, so it'd probably be better to think about sports as a distraction from the problems rather than some sort of cathartic solution to frustrations or aggressions. Now we're going to have quite a few more readings later on in the semester that focus on fan violence and expectations of violence, but I wanted to give just a little bit of a primer here in terms of aggression, and especially in terms of uses and gratifications, the possible motivation of catharsis, and how it doesn't really fit real well with sports consumption.